Welcome everybody to another episode of Hold On, I'm Calling My Mom podcast. We have the one and only mom, Barbara, in the building.
Hi, all.
And myself, Paul. And we are so grateful and excited that you guys are tuning in, listening. If you're here now, thank you from the bottom of our hearts, because we really appreciate you guys tuning in. And it's just nice to hear people like, oh, I took this away from your episode, or I heard this, or I love this guest.
All my friends are asking for my autograph.
A bitch got her hair done and she thought she's fucking, I'm saying superstar. She thinks she's on some A-list shit over here.
Right?
I told you the podcast was getting to her head. She's a superstar. She's getting her hair blown out before she does videos now with us, before she does episodes. It's a whole new woman over here. Give everybody a little hair moment. There you go. Hey, love it. I will say it does make you look way more youthful. I mean, not that you're not, but it gives you like a youthful long blonde hair.
Remember I went dark that one time?
Everyone was like,
yeah, I was like pale as anything. Like
it was not that bad.
Oh my God, it sucked the life out of me.
It was not that bad.
I literally did it for what, 24, 48 hours? And I called her and was like, you gotta put the blonde in. She said, I told you.
I remember you tried to do like a orange auburn type.
Oh, that was horrible. I looked like a peacock. No, I looked like a rooster. It was a rooster. It was like literally like just the girl did it who was horrible.
It had the 80s feathered hair.
No, it's just like orange here, then not here. Like I was
like
literally
chunky highlights.
Huh?
It was like the chunky highlights.
Yeah, it was like clumped. It wasn't natural. Oh my God, it was horrible.
Well, your hair looks flawless, mother.
Thank you.
I don't know about you, but when I'm I just was at the grocery store the other day. This is such a pet peeve of mine that I feel like I called you and I'm like, nothing bothers me more than some unself-aware, like in your own world ass people. Like I'll be in line when I'm checking out and they're here and I'm scanning my phone to do Apple Pay or something. They're right here. I'm like, are you fronting the bill? Are you paying for it? Like I'm like, oh my God. I had this girl at the register the other day. I see after she told me the total, half my stuff's still on the conveyor belt. And I was like, oh, did you ring that up? And she's like, no, I thought it was hers. And I turn to look and it's because the people behind me are literally
right next to you.
Their stuff is merged next to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, it happens all the time. Like the other day, I was on the phone with you. I'm like,
I like how you're doing this. That's my move.
Yeah. Bye. Sometimes I don't even know why I'm on the phone with you because I'm like sidetracked, but I'm still on it. But it's just
happy with you. And sometimes we're not even talking. You're just like, oh, where's this? Like you're talking to yourself, but to me.
Yeah, you're along the journey with me, whether you like it or not. But you're looking at something, somebody's like walks in front of you, and I'm like, excuse me. Like, we need to normalize being polite in grocery stores because there is some real like cutthroat people out here. Like it's real barbaric sometimes. I'm just like, oh my gosh. Like if I'm going to reach something and I'm in front of you, I'm going to say, excuse me.
No.
I'm just like, what is happening? What is happening?
They park the carts right in the middle of the
aisle.
And it's like, how do you think we're all going to get by? And they're like oblivious to it. Excuse me.
And then there's been times where I have tried to like shimmy around it and like push it. And the person gets mad that I'm like, and I'm like,
you're like, yes.
I'm like, you left it in the aisle. Yeah, I'm going to push it out of the way. I can't move. I'm just like, girl, I'm here to get my protein waffles and pizza and keep it moving. Like, I'm not here to fight with you. Other than the chaos that brought and obviously just the lack of compassion and humanity at the grocery stores, I had somewhat of a relaxing, peaceful weekend.
You did.
I decided to do a little staycation with Jordan. I didn't even read a book. It was like, I didn't even want to like digest anything by reading. I played music and I just sat there.
It's the most relaxing. It refreshes. You can get out of your head. Yeah.
When I was younger, I always felt like I wanted to be always constantly around people. And I said, I actually feel more recharged now being by myself. And not doing anything and just sitting there,
You
literally
came
in pure silence.
over to my world. You
What?
came to my world.
I did. You're the queen, notorious of that.
Yes.
But
Yep.
it feels good. It felt
It
like a
feels
good
great.
it was like just having the balcony door open in the bedroom and the fresh air coming in, and I think it's so crucial to just, like, do this in life and just be able to, like I feel like so many times it's like, you get caught up with, like, doing something, and even for me, it's like, I feel like I always wanna put my hands in so many things, and then, it's like, how do you avoid a burnout of, like, doing that to yourself where it's like, what am I finding pure enjoyment doing? And I think being more conscious about saying like I mean, I would ideally like to say every week, but once every 2 weeks or something, doing something that it's like implementing into my life that doesn't have anything to do with something where I have to put thought into and just
I mean,
be
even once a month. I mean, realistically, you can do once a month, every 2 weeks or something might be kind of stretching it. But once a month to do something for yourself like that.
well, my therapist was like, you really stick to your word. And I was like, what do you mean?
You have a new therapist?
Yeah.
You didn't tell me that.
Yeah, I have a new therapist.
Oh,
It's a woman this time.
wow.
It's not a gay man, which is what I've had mostly in the past, because
Yes.
what I have decided to do is do cognitive behavioral therapy, which is not what I've done in the past with my past therapist. I
This is more treatment
this is
and
more like I feel like I'm working towards something.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's treatment. Yeah.
because sometimes I feel like I talk in circles. Welcome to the podcast. And I feel like sometimes there's not always like an act of like solving it, right? Like I can tell myself this, but she gave me really sound advice the other day, which I caught myself doing it last night and I was like, wow. I remember I stopped and I looked at her and I said, I really do have something wrong with me. Like I really struggle with this. Like I do. And I was like, it's crazy because there are people
Why did you say that?
she made a good point that I attach my emotions with my feelings. And sometimes they're not factual, they're just emotions and they're what I feel doesn't make them truthful. Wanting to feel like you're credible at what you do, in terms of like your work and, in terms of like like things
Yeah,
that I, do and I put so much passion behind and really enjoy, you want to be perceived as like a credible person. And sometimes I think I've struggled with feeling like, oh, well, I haven't gotten it's almost like a validation of knowing that your work is being, you know, consumed and it relates
yeah,
to people. And I feel like I'm a little bit of like a unlegitimate creator, so to say. Like I've done a lot of work and I'm proud of that. And those are the moments that I don't think of that. But I think like, oh, where I'm not where I think I should be at now. And instead of feeling that way, she was like, that's your feeling. Now on it, write a line down, create like negative thought and then corroborate the thought. And I want you to write like 3 to 5 things of like what is factual that has proven that you are not this.
wow,
And I was like, I moved from New Jersey to LA to follow my dreams. I wrote follow through, ambitious, committed, loyal, and driven.
very good.
And those are things that have proven themselves to be facts. So I need to
Facts.
go with the facts over what my emotions feel because I feel like I let my emotions skew my thoughts
Gotcha.
of what I think,
Okay.
which is facts. I do let my emotions dictate.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm like, okay, this is what I want. I need to do the work now. Like I'm ready to do the work.
yes.
It is quite the week of learning, and we're just getting started. We're just getting started. And we're adding more onto the list because we got our girl Brandi Babb here. She's a life coach, somatic practitioner. She just has such a warm energy. And I feel like on a sensitive topic like this can be, regarding like alcohol, which is something that we've talked about and what I want to tackle on here. It's nice to have somebody who's like walk the walk, has similar, experiences that we have had in terms of like family dynamics. And I think that she's just like a really brilliant voice and just knows a lot and can share a lot. So I'm excited to chat with her more. So let's welcome to the podcast, Brandi. Hi, Brandi.
Hi, how are you, Paul?
Oh my God.
I love it. Hi,
Yes,
Barb.
Hi, nice to meet you.
It's lovely to meet you as well.
It's
Thank you for
Barbara, but
having me.
for the sake of the podcast, she's sticking to the identity of mom,
I
clearly.
love that. You have to.
We're building our brand identity here, so
Yes. Gotta stay true to the brand for sure.
absolutely.
We're trying.
We were literally just saying how excited we are to chat with you. I was on the phone with you. It was just supposed to be like, hey, like, when do we want to set up, like, an invite to do this? And then it's like
Right.
45 minutes later, I'm like, girl, we need to save this for the podcast because we're
I
getting into
know.
it already.
I know. We already decided we could do a series of 5 just hitting different topics, like our own stuff, the science, everything. So I know.
So much to consume, and it's
There's
like
a lot.
all good,
Yeah.
like knowledgeable stuff, surrounding alcohol in general. I just think that you can be able to provide so much information for not only me and my mom, but hopefully so many people, that are listening. I wanted to ask you just because, if somebody who was unfamiliar about life coach, somatic practitioner, could you kind of explain like the type of work you do with your clients?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for asking because I know they are very kind of obscure terms. And from the life coaching perspective, so life coaching is really all about setting intentions, setting goals, and moving forward to accomplish those. And so back about 6 years ago now, I jumped into that to really start working. I was already in a training and development background, and I got really passionate about coaching when I had a really positive experience of my own with the experience of coaching to quit drinking and quit drinking alcohol. And so from the coaching perspective, there's a lot of work towards like goals and working with mindset and challenges that are getting in our way. Now, the flip side of that, so that's a lot of the head work, right? The flip side of that, the somatic practitioner work. So that's something I've been a certification program I've been going through for the last 3 years, which is essentially working with the body and working with the nervous system. And as we dive into this conversation, I'm sure we're going to chat more about it, but alcohol can often be used for dysregulation that happens in the body for overwhelming feelings of stress or people who have experienced trauma. Or alcohol has come in at a very early age for things like social anxiety. And so I saw that when I began doing my work with people as a missing piece, because there's so much that, like, the way the mind communicates with the body is there's less information going down than there is from the body going up into the mind, and so up into the brain. Barbara, I would assume you as a nurse have a lot of experience with that, and can really, really appreciate that. So that's where those two have come together, and how I have brought them in when I work with people.
I mean, for your own a personal story, which I thought was so, just amazing for, what you do and having the background to be like, hey, I live this life. I know that you became sober in 2019. Can you talk a little bit about like what made you kind of take that step and how I'm sure that has influenced and impacted your, career path?
Essentially, for me, I had grown up in a household where there was definitely two conflicting messages around it. So I grew up with a dad who was using alcohol quite regularly, and there was a lot of discussion around alcoholism, and it was a very conflicted. It caused a lot of conflict in my household. So dad was drinking, mom didn't, and it was definitely a source of a lot of arguing and a lot of conflict that happened in the household I grew up in. And so there was also a lot of controls around the idea of drinking. I did not drink until I was 21. I was actually scared of it. There was like this fear of God that was put in me that, like, if you drink, you're going to become an alcoholic. It was essentially the message. And so, that there's that like little message that sits there. And then once it was legal, like, well, I'm doing this thing, and I started just, it was dating, it was out with friends. And I met my husband. I was bartending in school, and was working in the hospitality industry. And so there was a lot of alcohol use in general at my job, at home. And that just continued to progress throughout the course of my 20s, my 30s. I really kind of started seeing it wasn't just going out with my husband and going out having fun anymore. It was, I'm coming home at the end of my work day and having a bottle of wine, maybe it was spread out over the course of the night, but it's happening a lot. And then it just kind of kept going and increasing. And when I lost my dad back in 2017, and I found during that time that like my alcohol use really kind of like just went up another level, just especially not so much the amount, but the frequency. And I was using it to deal with, or what I learned later, really, what I saw later was I was using it to not navigate my grief. I mean, I was in therapy. Fast forward about another like year and a half later, where I realized I'm like, I can fast forward my life 20 years from now, and it's going to look just like this if I don't change something, if I don't interrupt something. Where it just hit me how much time it was stealing, not just from me, but from the people I loved. I was holding back on sending text messages after a certain time, wouldn't make phone calls after a certain time of night to the people I love the most. Not spending as much time with my local family. Friends, like I would be like, okay, we have fun at dinner or going out. And I'm like, all right, I'm ready to go home because I don't want to be monitoring my drinking anymore. I want to get home and just drink and not have anybody watching. And so there were definitely some like wake up calls that happened. And so that end of 2018, I was like, that's it. I'm going to take some serious time away. I had done stints here and there of quitting. But then I finally just like, that was the time where that's it. I didn't realize I was quitting. I thought I was just going to take a break for about a month and learn about myself. And I need to get really honest with myself about that. And I did. And that was when I really started doing this work. And that was when I saw actually the work I'd been doing in therapy, like actually start elevating and start working. And
you're like, all this stuff that I've finally been doing, it's like paying off, right?
Exactly.
You never felt the need to like go to like an AA or something like that kind of organization?
I did. Yeah. And it's a great question. And it's one I get a lot because that is what we traditionally know is AA. And one of the things that I think is really wonderful about this day and age is that there are new options that are available. There's this beautiful this gray area that can exist versus it being like, this is the only way to go about it. But there's been a lack of knowledge that there are other alternative ways to like not drink or to drink less. Like, the sober curious movement has gotten very big, or you hear terms like gray area drinking, and where people are like, I don't resonate fully with like the term alcoholic. And even that name, even that word has changed. And there's other people who like having that identity is very important to them. I love this open conversation that we get to have these days, that there are different ways to go about this. I think I shared with Paul that like, I've worked with people who are just looking to cut back and who are looking to drink less and get into a place where they feel comfortable with what their alcohol consumption looks like, versus cutting it out of their lives completely.
When we were initially talking, it was about sober curious, and
which is a whole new word I've never heard of. Sir, that's like a whole, I didn't know what that word, like what that saying even meant.
And many people don't. And it really is the exploration, right? It's like trying a hat on, for lack of a better phrase. But it's allowing ourselves, maybe it's, on a night out with friends, it's saying like, I'm going to go out and not drink tonight on Friday night. Maybe I will Saturday, but I'm making this intentional choice to not drink on Friday night. And so, or I'm going to try 30 days and see what my life looks like and feels like without alcohol. And then I'll make an informed decision 30 days from now. So even that phrase, sober curious, that we're talking about, it opens up possibility.
Is the informed decision about analyzing kind of if you think you have a problem with alcohol or a relationship with alcohol? What is that?
It's really up to the individual. So, and I want to clarify something, because I think when we're having this conversation, we're talking about people who are not in the like 10% of physically addicted. So I really want to clarify that as well, because there is a spectrum. There's a spectrum that's the alcohol use disorder spectrum. And that goes from mild, moderate to severe. And so someone who is at the far end of that spectrum, who is physically addicted, who needs to go into a 72-hour watch program and things like that. This is the sober curious movement is definitely, we're talking about someone who's down on this end of the spectrum, who is like, I'm feeling more of a pull to this than I want to, or I'm noticing this is a problem for me and I want to kind of feel my life out without it, I'm noticing that my relationship or, my relationships are getting a little, a little too tied to this going out or seeing impact here. So I do want to make sure and clarify that because it's a very valid question
Yeah.
of looking at that evaluation.
What is the definition of sober curious?
Yeah, so what I would classify it is really just exploring what it looks like to be a temporary time without drinking and seeing where you go from there. And that is like me just kind of bringing something up. What the actual terminology is, I don't know if there's a specific definition because again, like you think about the word of curiosity and it's like, oh, I can just kind of feel this out and I can maybe take some time off. I can see what it's like to go on a vacation without alcohol. That would be sober curious.
Or it's just actually someone who's thinking maybe there is some kind of connection or a relationship with alcohol in social settings or any kind of settings that they're then looking inward saying, oh, let me go out and see if I can go without to kind of prove to themselves, I guess.
That's always been interesting for me. I kind of told you, Brandy, like I like implementing a little sober curiosity in my life. I think for me, I do it in the sense of if you're on vacation and you're in the summer and you feel like every weekend your life is revolving around alcohol and I'm traveling and it's like 3 days in a row and then the next weekend we're going out, I'm like, it's serving me no purpose. It's kind of hindering me from my fitness goals or what I want to do. And I just feel like it's not making me feel good. So I'm going to then make it mindful to know, well, I don't want to drink for the next month because I just feel like I've kind of gone a little too far this last couple of weeks and I want to pull back on it. And that's how I view sober curiosity, is that I'm exploring the possibility of living my life in a way where I could remove alcohol from my life.
That's a beautiful definition of it, Paul. And I love how you have that personal experience with it, even if the language hadn't been there before. Like that's how exactly you're living it. And that is what sober curiosity is there's more of that gray area. Like, oh, I want to look and see what my life looks like and feels like without alcohol necessarily in it, with less alcohol in it. And allowing there to be that curiosity. Like I would say in the story that I shared with you about my own experience, I went in as sober curious because I really wanted to have an intentional 30 days. And that 30 days taught me like, no, I actually want to pursue this. And a lot of people these days are not even using the word sober. They're saying that they're living, they just don't drink alcohol or they live an alcohol-free life. So it's interesting how, language is just changing so much around it.
I kind of view it as like a launching pad for some people. It is kind of that toe in the water where you're like, let me see, like I've told you there are times where I've gone 30 days, out of the year where I was like, no, 60 days out of the year where I was like, no. And it feels good. And it does give you this like different sense of clarity that I had never encountered before, where I was like, whoa, like I'm like, I don't drink that much, but when I don't, I feel like a whole new view on life that I find very like interesting. And I think it's really good for you to do that.
Yeah.
Also, I wanted to tackle the definition of alcoholism, which I think I kind of always have grown up in our household where alcoholism was viewed very black or white. It was one or the other. I think it's very subjective of what we classify alcoholism. And then I know that there's also alcohol disorder, correct?
Yeah, alcohol use disorder. So it's actually shifted away from the term alcoholic to alcohol use disorder. And so that is from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM-5, which that essentially is what therapists and psychoanalysts, psychiatrists are going to be using for diagnostic purposes for mental disorders. And so the definition in there is a problematic pattern of alcohol use leading to clinically significant impairment or distress. And then that goes on that spectrum of mild, moderate, and severe. And so they essentially there's 11 questions like to kind of evaluate where someone is. And people can do a self-evaluation even on that. And I can provide a link to that for for your show notes if you'd like. Essentially, the terminology shifted because there was realization that the term, alcoholic really was kind of taking people down a notch mentally when they were going through this process of working to quit, because there were a lot of just societal kind of expectations around what that word meant, sort of what the vision of that person was. And so it felt, kind of coming back and using that word disempowering again. They were finding that it really was a very disempowering use of terminology for people, which it really shifts things for people. And so there was an awareness of that. And so, so that terminology started shifting, and that is the actual term now, is alcohol use disorder. And then people are on the spectrum of it.
Yeah, I think with alcohol, when you say alcoholism, even to someone who drinks, if they have the concept thinking, oh, an alcoholic is someone who's stumbling and fallen down and can't function. And, but like you said, there's so many variations of it. So I do like the other term that you're using better than, because there is all different stages of it.
Yeah, I think alcohol use disorder to me feels more relevant because I think, like I was saying, my mom's generation it was very much like, you're either not or you're an alcoholic. And I feel like I have seen so many people where you're like, you could bleed the lines, you're extreme or excessive, or, sometimes you just get a little carried away. And I actually even had, because before I knew I was talking to, I looked into it to see the statistics of this, and I saw this from Harvard. I put, what is the difference between alcoholism and abusing alcohol? A study by Harvard said that nearly 1/3 of American adults are excessive drinkers, but only 10% of them have alcohol use disorder.
Yes. And so then that speaks to that severe 10% where you have that physical addiction that's in place. And, where I would assume, Barbara, like for you and, in a hospital setting or something like that, where you're going to see more of that kind of direct, alcohol use come in, where there's a lot of people, like to your point, Paul, there's a lot of people who are just functioning day to day. I was going to work every day. I was, had a successful marriage, had a successful job, was going on nice vacations. When you think about that term, functional alcoholic.
I was just going to say that with the quotes, functional. Yes. That's what we would call it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so that terminology has definitely shifted. And if I would classify myself now on that scale, I would probably put myself in the middle, right about in the middle, maybe tilting a little bit to the side here. So it's fascinating.
Could you say, and be at liberty to say, is there a difference between somebody who abuses alcohol and an alcoholic? Is there a difference between the two?
I don't know if I would actually go into that terminology personally. Really, the way I approach things is that, how is it showing up for you, and is it a problem? If we say that you're in that severe 10%, that is your life is being incredibly impacted. You are, waking up and needing alcohol. There's physical signs of it. There might be shaking. There's things like that. I think most people who drink are abusing alcohol in some way. Honestly, I think we can all abuse it. Because, and this is where the science comes in too, is because alcohol it's addictive. It's an addictive substance. So while genetics come into partial play, there isn't there is not one gene that says okay, you are going to be an alcoholic or you're going to have severe alcohol use disorder. There isn't one gene that does that. And there's a culmination of things. There are a culmination of things that can contribute for sure from a genetic standpoint. But there's also so much that comes into play from a societal standpoint as well. We think about alcohol being marketed to us to decrease stress, to have fun. I mean, just look at the commercials that we see for alcohol online, right? On television. And so when we see those things, it's okay, well, we get that messaging, but then when we're consuming it for de-stressing at the end of the day, when we're using it to ease things socially for us, it becomes dependent because our brain actually learns, well, this environment is not safe.
Relates it, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So this environment is not safe. I need something to make me feel safe in it. And so alcohol comes in, and then the patterning and the addiction, that addictive element starts coming into play. And one thing I'd love to remind people of is that so much about these patterns it's predictive safety. It's what our brain has done before, it's going to do again. Mm-hmm. And now we're bringing in an addictive substance, and And so it's going to continue to accelerate and continue to be exacerbated, especially when it's used from an emotional standpoint. So emotional ties to alcohol and the way that it works with the brain, it's incredible the links that are made there and the neural pathways that get formed.
Right. Or we would say like that's the way your coping mechanism is to
Yes,
grab a drink. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for putting it in layman's terms.
I think for us, and I mean, I can speak for myself, but in my family, there's a lot of alcoholism that runs on my family. In my immediate family, it was a very hot button topic. Everybody was very aware of it. I think that we were all very hypersensitive to it. I feel that sometimes in a family unit, of alcoholism is like a rampant condition that somebody's living under. It can have an immense impact on your life growing up and navigating your relationship with alcohol. Correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I'd even just to ask that back to you, Paul, how do you think it influenced you and your relationship?
Yeah, I think for me, it was always something that having somebody in my household who, struggled with it, it made, the topic of it feel like it was like a bad thing. Like you just can't, like, it's like, no, you can't. And I think for as a kid, it's hard to kind of say you're never going to go out in the world and not drink alcohol. The first time I got, drunk, I was like, I did it on my own terms. I waited. I didn't want to do it when anyone else peer pressured me. Clearly, control issues at 100, right? That I was like, I'm not even going to get drunk until I want to do it on my own. But it just was like, my upbringing is very different also than like people in my family. I went to college. I went away to college. I lived in college culture, which alcohol is very, very encouraged, highly influenced. I'm gay. I moved out to Los Angeles. West Hollywood, is a great place, but it's full of bars and bars and bars. It always made me question, oh my God, well, if this person in my family is an alcoholic, then am I an alcoholic? Like, oh my God, am I going to be like that? I think it has made me hyper aware of saying, I've done a little too much fun this weekend. I'm pulling back. And I don't know if somebody who truly struggles with it, would they be self-aware enough to know that they have to pull back, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense. And, I think you bring up such interesting things because, like, even just talking about various, like environments that we live in, that we grow up in, that we work in, that, all of these different things, they all play a role in our relationship with it, right? And you think about like just all the ways that you talked about the environments that you have lived in, Paul, like thinking about that, I mean, you can see how those pulls, how there's going to be these strings that get pulled on. And especially I think, also as I shared with growing up in a household as well, where there was someone who really struggled with alcohol and it was a huge just point of contention. It always there is always that pull for me, if there was, of like, wait, is this too much? Is it not enough? Wait, now I need to prove myself. I need to prove that I can drink. That was something that came up for me, was like, I need to prove to myself that I can actually handle my alcohol. So it's interesting.
I can see that, yeah, for myself, of like being like, oh, I'm in control of this. That you're not going to get to the point where you're not remembering everything you've done or something like that. Like I could see where that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And where a lot of the like I'd say more of the belief work comes in, and working with people around, what do I believe is true about alcohol, and really getting clear on that. Like, do I believe that if I do this, I'm going to, turn into an alcoholic, or I'm going to turn into like ex parent or whomever it might be? Am I aware of those types? Am I aware of those types of things, and actually pulling those out of ourselves and being really clear and looking at them? Do I believe that I can go out and have a good time without alcohol? Or do I need it as a social lubricant? Like, really allowing ourselves to explore that and get clear about the role that we're giving it in our lives. I think that can also help some of those things that you're talking about, like, fall away.
Talking about it being so black or white, I think
Yes.
that's where that comes from for me, where we had such an extreme condition of being in our household where it was very like
Right,
seeing.
so I'm now like very hypersensitive to it.
Yep.
You know, like I worry for my children. I worry, like I just the littlest things Paul can say agree with me as like, if he tells me, oh, I was, out at the bars or whatever, my brain's already going like 50 places with it. Yeah.
You can feel a little bit of her, like she's not saying it, but there's a little bit of projection like that I've talked to her about, where I feel like I know she doesn't mean to, because she's coming from a hurt place where it's impacted her life tremendously, because she's been on the receiving end of somebody who I would say, when
Just
you're
many people that it has ruined their lives. And to me, it's just, I think of that and then I think genetics and I think of all the other things. So I'm just, just very hypersensitive. I would
Yeah.
it would kill me to have my children go through that, so I'm like, just don't. Just don't do it. Like that would be the ultimate for me, but that's not my choice to make for them. So that's
But then
very
on the contrary to that is where I feel like, oh, well, I'm very self-aware to know those things. And if I ever felt like it was becoming to completely overtake my life and it was just doing more harm than good, then I know I would be aware enough to say, this doesn't feel right. And I don't know. I never question out that there might be a point in my life where I say, I'm done. Like you, Brandy, where you just said, what, weighing that and just getting to a point where is like, is it worth it? I could get to that point. I don't know. But I think back to your question about like how when I grew up and how it made me feel, I love that she's being honest, but it made me feel like there was always something bad with maybe being a kid and having those, oh, I don't really remember last night, or, oh, I don't know, like, and things that you do as a kid growing up,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so interesting. I mean, you see the family dynamics and how much it has an impact, right? You just see that, the role of the parent, the role of the child. And this is such a common, I mean, we've had these same conversations in my own household, my own, with my mom and with my sisters. And so I can really empathize with where you're both coming from, because, like even when we were talking about the neural pathways, well, like, Barb, I'm watching you talk and like I can see there is fear coming up. Like there is like that when I talk about like the nervous system, like there's sympathetic activation coming up and all of the like, but what if, and that anxiety that shows up around it, right? Like, Paul, if you live your life this way, I'm worried that this is what's going to happen because that's the path you've seen and what you've known. And
like
so
it's really going to be self-aware of. Some people aren't self-aware that they have an issue. Not just saying Paul, I'm saying, in general, some people just aren't aware of it until it's really,
But I
really
think that's where you really have to assess of what does that person's track record look like, and what of their sense of. Brandy, obviously, you have said you have always been aware of this. This has always been something that has lived in your mind. And then suddenly it got to a point where you were like, okay, this just does not feel like it aligned with who I am. So I think if you were at that place where you get to that point, you've already kind of built up that awareness of knowing, hey, this is not fit for my life anymore.
Exactly. Well, and even hearing like Paul, the way that you speak about it, right? Like you have that awareness of it. You have that, you saw the example of, I don't want this to turn into this in my life. Like you already have kind of that wall. My guess
Mhm.
is you already have that wall or that line in the sand for you of like, I'm not gonna, I'm not going to. And if I see myself getting close to it, I'm going to pull back. Like you have that because you were on the receiving end of seeing that dynamic between your parents.
Yeah.
I would imagine. And then Barb, you've got these experiences as well that you're pulling from and seeing like I want to protect you. I want to like wrap you up and hold you and protect you and yeah, none of these bottles exist out here, right?
right.
And I think like what's amazing is that you and Paul are having these conversations and like you get to pull from what the real experience is, right? And the real experience is that Paul has this awareness and Paul is like, okay, yeah, I do take time off or I go out and then I take a break or, and getting to like really see that he's having these open conversations. And so I love that you two are opening this conversation together because gosh, talk about, well, that's what this podcast is all about, right?
Oh, thanks, Brandy. That's so sweet of you. Thank you for saying that.
Absolutely.
you.
Yeah, I mean well, Brandy even said she watched a couple episodes and she's like, I feel like, these are conversations that me and my family could have. And I was like, great, you're in the right place. You're an honorary family member at this point now.
I love it.
But yeah, I mean, it just, this is why I wanted to do this, because I just said, like, that when you go through so much trauma as a family, like you said, it does catch up to you at a certain point, whether you address it early on or don't. And, I think I would be lying if I said I never had the fear that I was going to be like XYZ parent that had this type of issue. You know what I mean? So, but I think anybody who goes through something traumatic always is going to have some sense of fear not being like, they don't want to be what they saw.
Yes, absolutely. And it's that, like, and this is where more of that nervous system regulation work comes in, where it's like, okay, if we can calm our bodies, and if we can bring some regulation into our bodies, then we can help settle this a little bit and come back into the truth of what is and what's here right now, versus the worries and the predictive patterns that we just get so anxious about. Right? Like, whether it's ourselves, whether it's someone else. I have to
Yeah.
work on that constantly myself. So just remembering, like, okay, this is what's true right now. It hasn't happened, and it doesn't have to.
With all this information that we've talked about, and like, to me, I just feel like, oh, it gives me a good feeling. I'm like, oh, okay, like there's people who corroborate how you feel. Maybe somebody's listening to this and it's like, oh my gosh, they're right, like that's how I feel. Or maybe it's eye-opening. What are the first steps that you would recommend for somebody if it feels like it's not aligning in their life, or if they feel like they want to have a better relationship with it? What would you recommend for somebody to stick their toe in the water and say, okay, let's try it?
Yeah, I would really recommend pausing and having curiosity. So, and what I mean by that is, like, so if you already have these little thoughts that are like, this is speaking to me a little bit, or I am curious about that, kind of just keep an eye on how you feel as you are drinking or before you drink. Like, for instance, on a like a Thursday or a Friday, let's say you're more of a weekend drinker, right? Do you start around, maybe like Friday, Thursday night, Friday, morning or afternoon, you start going like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to get da 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 da, can't wait to get home, or can't wait to, get out to the bar and go do this thing, and you're anticipating the feeling of it. Like, I would be curious to, like, just lean into that and get curious about that. Like, the idea of pouring that glass of wine when you get home, do you immediately notice that you feel kind of like a quieting down in your body? And that is all very natural things that happen, because when we, like, our body's already primed for the alcohol. And so it's interesting. I mean, we could have a whole episode just on the science, I'm sure, um but but I would really just encourage people to really get curious about that and pay attention to, like, when are the tugs, what are the pulls. If take a few days off, or a couple of weeks off, and pay attention to, how am I sleeping? Because alcohol impacts sleep no matter how much we drink. It's essentially like us drinking espresso before we go to bed. So the 3 a.m. wake ups, we think it's like, oh, my mind's racing about work or whatever it is. Mine's racing about work because our body is getting flooded with adrenaline and cortisol from the alcohol that we drank earlier in the evening that relaxed us. But now our body's overcompensating by releasing these counter chemicals. And so now our mind won't stop slowing down. And so, because those chemicals are in there, and we're getting flooded with these hormones, these stress hormones. And so even just paying attention to those types of things, like, how was my sleep after, not drinking for 3 days? How did I sleep on that fourth, fifth night? And paying attention to those types of things, noticing we know it's an alcohol. Alcohol is a depressant, and also it accelerates things as well. So it works on both. Do you notice after not drinking for a week or two that, like, my mood's a little bit lighter, or things don't feel so much like they're coming down on me, or am I noticing that I'm a bit less anxious? Because it feeds all these different places in our bodies. The thing with alcohol is it crosses the blood-brain barrier, and so it impacts every cell in our body. And so when we're aware of that, like, you think about that, and it impacts every part of our system. So really, like, paying attention That's where I really like to start with people. If anybody's considering this, it's just pay attention. Start thinking about noticing where it shows up for you, like whether it's work environment, whether it is at home, whether it is the social settings. And then the other thing that I really like to encourage people to start with too is start paying attention to the social cues around you. So what are the billboards that you pass by on your way to work in the morning? What are the commercials that you see? What are the shows that you watch, and how is alcohol showing up in them, because it's so much just a part of the background scenery a lot of times that we forget, that we don't realize, like, that subconscious information that we're absorbing all day long about it. So those are a few areas that I would just recommend people start and just get curious.
I have a question. So say you do the sober curious, you say 30 days, I'm going to do this. And then when you go out, it's like, wow, and you just binge and you just go like overindulge. And then that's what you tend to do, kind of. It's not always, you're not drinking always, but when you go out, it's a binge or an overindulgence. Never know, like, okay, this is the stop point. What would you recommend or think about that?
Yeah, that's a great question, because that is what happens to most people. Because as I mentioned, alcohol is progressive. And so our body and brain doesn't really forget. So I decided I was going to do like a whole 30 and take 30 days off, right? You don't drink, eat sugar, blah, 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 all of that. And so I did that. Well, it was like the night before my birthday. I'm like, that's it. It's day 27. I'm just going to drink. And, and so my husband and I went out. I ended up having I'm just going to have a glass of Prosecco. I ordered a glass of Prosecco. That led to 3 glasses of Prosecco, came home, had a glass of red wine, woke up the next morning, and I was so hungover because I hadn't been drinking for a month. And so, but the thing is that physiology just kicks back on, right? Like it doesn't forget. So there is that, like, you hear stories of people not drinking for 5, 10, 20 years, and they start again and they're at the same level. Your body is like primed for it. Right? It's like your body is primed for it. And those neural pathways are there. And so very quickly you can go back to the same levels. And so that it's a great question, because it's something to pay attention to. And that might be one of those signs that, like, maybe this is a bigger problem than I realize it is for myself.
I don't want Brandi to leave. I'm like, she's just giving us so much good information.
I just feel like this is a very interesting conversation, because there is so many levels to it. And like you said, even now, like, people will come home and, like what you did. Oh, I just need a drink to calm down. Look, I'm in the medical field. I hear it all the time.
I'd imagine.
Us nurses are like, oh my God, what a day.
It's everywhere. It's in every industry. It's in, whether it's my bunco group or my, after work crowd, it's just like, well, how do I do that without alcohol?
Everything's centered around it. Yeah.
Like you were saying there, at the end of the workday, right? Like, how do I come home and I just can't wait to get home and get that glass of wine, right? Like, we hear that all over the place.
All the time.
Or whatever, go home and pour that drink. I deserve this. And and so I think it really, that's a great place to look and be like, okay, what is it that I really need right now? Is it that I need some downtime? I need some freaking peace and quiet. I need some, I need a big old glass of water. I haven't eaten all day. One of the things I always encourage people to do whenever they're starting on this too is to halt, which is really just kind of do a check-in with yourself. If you're like, okay, I'm craving that drink. Well, before I have the drink, I'm going to check in. Am I hungry? Am I angry or anxious? Am I feeling lonely? And am I tired or thirsty? And just checking in on those things first and being like, okay, I'm going to take a big old glass of water and sit down for 15 minutes. Interesting. I don't have as much of a craving for that drink as I had before.
It's like kind of when you go through the McDonald's drive-thru and you're like, bitch, I want the McFlurry, I want the Big Mac, I want the chicken sandwich. And then you get it and you're like, oh my God, like, you're like, I actually didn't need all that, right? Like, I kind of feel like in a comparison, you could kind of say, like, I believe it is like an internal check, because I do that even with food sometimes. I get so, I'm going to eat everything and devour it. And then after you do it, you're like, oh, I really didn't need to do that. And that's kind of maybe what that buffer is for the drink is, right?
Exactly. Paul, I'm changing that acronym for sure. I'm updating.
If you start questioning and then really say to yourself, yeah, I think there is an unhealthy relationship with alcohol, what would your first step to do?
Hmm. Start looking around and talking to people. Like, social media is such a great resource these days. There are so many sober curious accounts. There's so many, sobriety groups. There's a lot of options out there. Start looking into your local AA meetings, or recovery, various recovery groups. Like, do a Google search for that. Visit, check out an online group. Community is a huge part of also, like, feeling like you're not weird, and
Yeah,
you're not abnormal for looking at this. And I think, like, I would say, Paul, your generation, I think, is so much more open to this conversation,
Mhm.
and there is so much more reception to it. I mean, you can see it just like the amount of bars now that have zero proof drinks and mocktail menus, and
yeah,
low proof. I mean, the fact that there are low proof alcoholic wines and beers and things like that, it's all changing so much.
Yeah.
yeah,
um, find people, whatever that looks like. If that means a therapist, a coach, a group, a AA meeting, I would say just start putting feelers out for conversations, for support, because that's a huge part of it.
yeah,
Find, casually mention something to a friend that maybe you notice has water every once in a while when you go out, or orders a club soda, just
yeah. Because
yeah, take it out of it.
there's still always shame with it, or embarrassment. Yeah,
Yeah, there can be. And I think that's what's so nice, is today that conversation is changing. It's getting a lot more normalized to
yeah.
not drink. Is that the case always? No. But I will tell you, even in the, like, almost 6 years since I quit, it's changed a lot.
I could keep you here all damn day and just keep
I
talking to
know.
you
Yes, I agree.
I'm enjoying it, and I could be here all day, and I know we can't be. So.
until we start getting paid for the podcast. Then we all could be here for part one, for part two, part three, part four. Um, I so appreciate you and just bringing this knowledge and just like just
Thank you.
so warmly. That's the only word I can
Yeah,
think of. It's just like being able, just so open, and you've been there, you get it more than anybody. So thank you for telling your story and providing
thank
us with all this knowledge. Where can anybody find you at?
Yeah, the best places to find me are either on Instagram or on my websites, either one. So, my personal is Little Big Leap, where I do my coaching, and so that's like little steps lead to big changes in our lives. And then I also run an online community which is called the Zero Proof Life, and so that's me and four other coaches, and we have an online community of people. And so those are the two best places to find me. Yeah.
Well, you should be very proud of yourself and all the work that you
absolutely,
do.
Thank you.
absolutely.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the opportunity to come on today. I so enjoyed this conversation.
Likewise.
Paul, we knew it was going to be rich, and appreciate the warmth of it too. So
Of
thank you.
course.
You
Thank
two are so inviting, and I appreciate you. One thing I just really want to acknowledge, like, I appreciate your own openness in your stories around this, because it is a very tender topic for a lot of people, especially the family dynamics of it. And so I really thank you for that, and normalizing
you.
this conversation.
you. Oh,
Yeah.
Thanks,
yeah, that
Brandy. That's
means
so
a lot.
sweet. You're gonna make Barb cry before you
I know,
leave.
I'm an emotional person. You did bring tears to my eyes with that, I'm not gonna lie. Thank
Good.
you.
Thank you for everything.
Bye.
Bye.
Could totally vibe with her. Love this episode.
It felt like something that really resonated with us. It's been a part of our life, and to be able to talk to somebody, and I think, sometimes we always want an answer. Is it a yes, or is it a no? Is it a wrong? Is it a right? Is it, and there's so many levels to it. And I think just having her expertise of saying, hey, if you notice it does this, then it's that. If it does this, then it's that. And also that internal dialogue of tapping in and
Yeah.
having the awareness or lack thereof to know, okay, this is really, a problem, and it's affected my life in a negative way. You're not going to do your sign off now? How do I have to remind you to do the sign off that you were adamant about for the first 3 fucking weeks of this podcast? And now I got to tell you to do the sign off, and you don't even remember doing it now.
All right, our conversation's done now. I'm hanging up. Bye.
Okay, I wasn't done talking. All right, bye. Bye, bitch.